Hey everyone. Yeah, hopefully you guys listened already to um, have listened already to my and hold on, there we go. I've already listened to my reviews and my monthly opinions and stuff for this month and this month's issue 264. But there's something I want to kind of get off my chest a little bit. I've talked about this primarily before, and oh, sorry, I hit the mic there. One of the disadvantages of having a headset mic is you always touch it, and you guys always end up hearing that touch. But anyway, one thing I want to talk about mostly is the fact that, well, there's something going on at certain websites, mostly like DeviantArt. Now, some people might think that this wouldn't affect the comic in any way, and you know what? You might be right. But then again, you might be wrong. You see, what's going on at DeviantArt, if you will, excuse me, is there's a comic going on as we speak. Well, not a comic, but there's some kind of a, I guess you could say a bit of a movement, if you will. A bit of a movement. And what that means is what that means in a sense, that movement, if you will. What that means is basically, okay, what I'm talking about is there's a movement going on at DeviantArt, and apparently it's a lot of fans that, if you take a look at the art, here's what you do. You can either go to Google or you can go to DeviantArt, doesn't matter where, type in TailsxNicole, just put TailsxNicole, or put Tails, put a small X, then put Nicole, and you'll be surprised about what you find. Yeah, exactly. You will find pictures, if not stories, based on TailsxNicole. Yeah, you'll find them. You will find stories and pictures based on pairing Nicole and Tails together. Now, I know a lot of fans might say, well, didn't you talk about this before? I did. I basically talked about whether or not it could become a reality, and it seems that now with this new continuity out there, excuse me, just adjusting the mic there, that with this new continuity out there, that fans are probably hoping it's more of a reality than ever. And here's why. When you think about all the pairings in the comic, a lot of fans pretty much feel and believe Sonic and Sally getting back together is just a formality, that it's going to happen no matter what. Okay, fine. That's perfectly okay. You know, if you want to believe that. Excuse me. If you want to believe that, it's okay. But and there are some that feel it's not a formality, that Ian Flynn's not going to allow it to happen, and that might be true. That might be true. Ian Flynn may not allow it to happen because he doesn't want to deal with all the backlash or deal with all the craziness, but it's, I think, honestly, I'm one of those fans that believe it's only a formality, it's only a matter of time before he does this. And I think this whale hog situation is just the first step in that. Now, to me, it's more along the lines of, as far as TailsxNicole go, again, like I said, it's more along the lines that you see that possibility of Sonic and Sally being back together. You see, obviously, that Bunny and Antoine are married and they're together. You see the possibility that Amy may end up having somebody outside of the group. Perhaps. So, the only question is, where does that leave, where does that leave Tails? Now, you might say, well, what about Rotor? Now, you might say Rotor's more of a compatible match for Nicole, but here's the thing. Rotor, he likes to do his own thing. He's more focused on, ooh, what about this? Ooh, we need to look at that. Ooh, ooh, ooh. So, yeah, you might get somebody for Rotor in the future. But the fact is, he's more of like focused. He's more like the Sonic in a sense that, you know, he's not wild, free, and adventurous. You know, don't get me wrong about that. He's not that. He's more along the lines of being a more focused on his, you know, on certain, you know, certain inventions and adventures and stuff like that. He's more focused on, hey, you know, this is cool. We need to explore this. We need to look at that. That's the kind of character he's being depicted as, not just a muscle-bound, you know, mechanic, inventor, whatever. So to me, yeah, down the line, you know, if the story's right, you can give him somebody. But the reason fans are pushing for Nicole and Tails is because to them it's too obvious. I mean, there have been certain, let's face it, there have been certain moments in the new continuity to where you see interaction between Tails and Nicole, and maybe that's Ian Flynn throwing a bone maybe that's Ian Flynn throwing a bone to those shippers and all that to say, hey, look, at least I'm acknowledging that, yeah, you guys want to see this, but it's not saying it's not going to happen or it is going to happen, but it's what fans want. And whether you like Ian Flynn or not, there are times where he tries to give the fans what they want. He just got to get the nod of approval from Sega and from Archie and sometimes Sega, if not both. He's got to get that nod of approval. And now that you have other writers out there that are working on the book, as we saw with this issue in the backup story, as we've seen before, you know, now that you got people that could take that workload off Ian Flynn, the possibility of Tails and Nicole is even stronger. Because the two writers that did the Bunny and Antoine backup story in 264, you could tell in a sense that they, you know, did the research and they basically did these characters justice, did their marriage justice. All right? They did all of that correct. And you could tell, perhaps, that these are the kind of writers that if they hear fans want to see Tails and Nicole together, or at least try to slowly build to maybe something happening between the two, then it's going to happen. Whether people want to believe it or not, it's going to happen. And I know some people don't want to hear that. I totally get that. I know some people do not want to hear that because some say, well, we don't want the comic to become a soap opera. And you know what? That might be true. You may not want it to become a soap opera, but, you know, you never know what's going to happen until it happens. But do I think, as I've said before, I think I mentioned this in the last time I talked about it, do I think it's a possibility? Well, in the old continuity, no. In this new continuity, hey, it's strongly a possibility. I mean, let's be honest. We are only a year into this new continuity. That's right. A year in. 252 was the start of it. 264 marks a whole year. So we're 1 year into this new continuity. And it's still possible. There's nothing can deny that, nothing can change that. But the only question is going to be where and when it happens. When and where it occurs. And to me, it's going to occur. It's going to happen down the line and probably sooner than we think. We just don't know exactly how soon that will be. Again, we just don't know, you know, how soon that'll be. And you know why we may not know how soon that's going to be? Because right now he's got a lot of stories ahead of him, but it doesn't mean one of those stories won't, you know, be focused on probably putting Tails and Nicole together. Now, one of the questions obviously anybody would have too when it comes to this is why in the world would why in the world would anybody want to put Tails and Nicole together? It doesn't make sense. Well, here's why they would want to do it. Again, like I mentioned earlier, it's because Tails doesn't have anybody. Nicole doesn't have anybody. And to, anybody that's listening, it just makes obvious sense that they should end up together. Now, for one, excuse me. On one hand, they might be right. On the other hand, they may not be right. The point is, fans just feel that, since Tails is like the Robin, if you will, a more well-treated Robin, if you know what I mean, in the Sonic series, and Sonic's more like that easygoing version of Batman. Well, kind of 1960s, but not really. But more of that easygoing version of the hero, and Tails is like the sidekick. They're going by the fact that there have been some comic book stories, and if not some animated stories and whatnot, and even live action and things like that, to where both the hero and the sidekick always ended up with a love interest. It's true. They always ended up with a love interest. Batman at times would end up with Selina Kyle or whoever was appropriate for him at that time. And at the same time, Robin, depending on which Robin it was, mostly Dick Grayson, would end up with Barbara Gordon, and and stuff like that. Or Tim Drake would end up with Starfire. You kind of get the idea, right? Things like that. Things like that, and that's how some fans are viewing this. Like, okay, Tails is like Sonic's sidekick, little brother, so it's only fair that if Sonic ends up with Sally, Tails should end up with Nicole, who in a sense is the other BFF of Sally. It only makes sense to them. And that might be true. That might be true in a way, but not entirely. But I look at it this way. I look at it like, okay, you want to end up putting these two together, but how do you get to that point? And I think that's the one thing they got to realize. That yes, it is possible in the new continuity, but getting to that point is going to be entirely up to what Ian Flynn or any of the other writers working on the book decide to do. It's going to be totally up to them. It's going to be like, okay, do we go in this direction? Do we do this? Do we do that? Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows, but I can tell you this. With all honesty, I truly believe that if there was ever a more believable possibility that Tails and Nicole could end up as a couple, it's in this new continuity. And before I close, I know one question people have is, well, wait a minute, Tails is like 11, 12. Nicole is supposedly around the same age as Sally. Is she? You see, that's where fans look at this as an advantage. Because you can think, well, wait a minute, Tails is around, Nicole's portrayed as being around the same age as Sally. Yeah, that's true, but let's be honest. Nicole is basically ageless. She is ageless, if you will. That is a fact. She is ageless right now in her current condition. Basically her current form, I should say, not condition, because I'm going off what Ben Hurst was originally planning, supposedly. But, yeah, she's basically ageless. And let's not forget that supposedly, when the story happened, she was about Sally's age, maybe older, and when she got kidnapped and turned into a computer. Her brain was transferred into a computer. So, to me, it's more like, it's more along the lines of, because of that situation, if Ian Flynn's playing off that Nicole is basically ageless. You don't know what her age is. The one time she dressed up, which I believe was like what was it? 221 or 220? I can't remember. She basically dressed up basically 220. So it was on the 220s, if you will. Actually the 2 teens, 218 or something. I can't really remember. But she dressed up to kind of, because, they were living in Mobitropolis at the time of the whole continuity. And she dressed up basically sort of like in normal, casual, go out and have a good time outfit. Now, some might interpret that as being an outfit worn mostly by maybe an 11, 12-year-old. So that basically, would give somebody an indication that maybe, even though she's highly intelligent, because she's an AI, that maybe her preferred form is that of someone maybe around Tails' age. And that might be true. That might be true, but then again, it may not be true. But like I said, that's why some fans are going in that direction, because she's ageless. She's practically any age she can be. If she wants to, still be herself, but let's say, be more like, let's say, Tails' age in the books, she can be that, and it's acceptable. And I believe that's why fans are going with this. And like I said, do I think it's more believable now than it's ever been to possibly happen in the comics? Of course I do. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably. Like I said, there's more of a chance of that happening now than it did in the original run. So I do think there's more of a chance. Will Ian Flynn or any of the other writers make it happen? It's totally up to them. How they make it happen? Totally up to them. But I believe in the new continuity, with this new continuity, this new soft reboot retcon that's now gone on for a whole year. Inside, it's been a year. I believe it's more of a possibility now than it's ever been.